Good afternoon, YouTube, and welcome back to the channel. Today will be my 30,000 mile review of the 2021 Royal Enfield Himalayan. So what's that? 48,000 kilometres. This little bike has now taken me through 15 countries. This is 30,000 miles in all sorts of terrain, motorways, off-road. What's went right with it? What's went wrong with it? It's quite windy today. Take the bike up into these hills here, so there's a little bit more shelter. Than that way I've got a better chance of being able to talk about exactly where we are with the bike. So, here she is folks, the Royal Enfield Himalayan. This is the BS4 model, 2021. It was the last of that run, I believe. And I bought this about 2.5 years ago with no miles on it. I bought it for cash because it was such a good deal. Now, this, what you see here, highlights why you want to put some decent crash protection on your bike. I've got GB bars on there. It's one of the first things I did. Tyres on this are a Mitas EO7. And I put these on the bike when it was at about 5,500 miles. The original tyres on this were Seat tyres, CEAT, I believe they're an Indian brand. And they were all right, they were average. But they squared off quite quickly because I was running a lot of road and quite a soft compound. You know, those first couple of thousand miles is pretty critical. If you're going to crash, that's probably when you're going to do it. So nice soft compound tyres, but realistically long term I would never put those back on the bike. They're fine for a new bike. The bike got a puncture at about 5,500 miles and it was on the rear. And when that happened, the tyre just collapsed. You know, the sidewalls on those Seat tyres are really, really thin. And that's what I like about these EO7 tyres. Apart from the fact they're great on and off road, they're a really tough compound, so they're long lasting. Now, I'm going to start going through some of the small niggles on this bike, folks, and it's probably going to start to come across as a bit of a litany of errors and problems, but that's not the case. This is a brilliant bike. But I think given the mileage, and I want us to be honest, completely brutally honest. This is my bike, here's what's happened with it. The original foot pegs on this I felt were too narrow, they're not great. I actually bent the first set of foot pegs on this when I came off the bike. I replaced them with these cheapo Amazon jobs. That's my second set of these, and these are more likely, they're just a cast metal. These are more likely to shatter if you drop the bike than to bend and perhaps, you know, damage the frame or anything like that. And I always keep a spare set here in the back just in case, because as you can see, it's not unusual for me to drop the bike and bend things. Apart from that, I occasionally get the ABS sensor light coming on, and I believe that's to do with mud because I'm taking it off road and that type of thing. So I've never really got to the bottom of that. It'll come on, I'll be on for a day or two, and then it'll go off. Now the ABS is still working, but you know it's shown up there on the dash. It's one of these little quirks of the bike. Last winter, you see the side stand sensors, a little plunger in there. That kept sticking and it meant that it was difficult to start the bike. Now, you can actually disconnect it, the plug there, or what you want to do is just take that off, clean it out, a little bit of WD-40, put it all back together again. And it's just if the bike's on the side stand for, you know, a few days, then that plunger can start to stick. But it's easy enough to replace. So again, that's just another small niggle. When I first bought the bike, I was occasionally getting, you know, odd click and clunk, and it turns out it was the chain itself. Now, I'm not saying there was anything particularly wrong with the chain, but it had a little bit of a dry spot, a bit of a kink in the chain. So that continued until I ended up replacing it. Let's not forget about the headlamp here. It's pretty anemic to say the least. Now obviously this needs a bit of a clean up. It's about as inexpensive as it looks, to be honest. Now all I did was put an upgraded bulb in here. Helps a little bit. I know a lot of people have, you know, replaced these with LEDs and that type of thing. The headlight is not helped by the fact that this instrument cluster is very, very bright. It's actually too bright and it affects your night vision. Thinking, where's the road, where's the corner? Just hold your hand up and block some of that light from the instrument cluster and you'll find that you'll be able to see better. You stop some of that glare. Now of course we can't all ride around like this all day or all night, but maybe a little bit of yellow acrylic. The BS3 model of this bike actually had yellow plastic, or yellow lights on that cluster. It was much darker, but they've replaced that from the BS4 onwards with this much brighter instrument cluster, and I think it's a mistake, to be honest, because it's far too bright, too much glare in your eyes. It makes an already pretty dire situation even worse. It was my first cold evening here in Scotland, and the battery was essentially dead. And I pissed around with it for about 2 weeks, bump starting the bike and trickle chargers and all that stuff. I ended up just replacing the battery. This has been running with an AGM battery for a couple of years. It's been running fine ever since, and I just put it over the winter, obviously. Put it on a trickle charge, especially the cold nights. It's been absolutely fine. And let's not forget about the infamous fogging of the control panel here. I did a video on how to resolve that. I did that within the first, I think, 4 or 5 months of owning the bike. That video's still up on YouTube somewhere if you want to have a look at it. It's been fine ever since. These are just some of the smaller niggles that I've had to, sort of deal with this bike since I've had it. Right, let's talk about some of the more major issues that I've had with this bike. So I can vouch for Royal Enfield's recovery service that comes with the warranty. Works really well. In the middle of nowhere, the bike was seriously overheating to the point where I couldn't run it, and it was a clutch issue at 2,000 miles, believe it or not. That is a big plus. At least here in Scotland, the dealerships for these are fantastic, and also the recovery service. The clutch itself actually got replaced on this. Again, I just did it myself at 12,500 miles. The brakes themselves are not great, but they're good enough for what the bike is. But somewhere in the world they were having problems with, anodization or, salt in the roads or something of that nature. Now, I got my recall letter last year, but I didn't take the bike in until this year. And the reason for that was there was nothing wrong with the brakes at the time. But in and around early June, maybe end of May, I started to get an issue with my rear brake caliper. I thought, right, now it's time to pull that recall letter out and get the new brake calipers on there, which I did. Took it into the dealership, obviously it was not an issue. And I did that before my trip to Europe. I thought I definitely need to get that done before I go. So I've essentially, I've had an extra year out of these. So the brakes now, I would need to say, with these new calipers are probably better than they've ever been. And it's one of those things where you perhaps don't realise just how bad they are or how far gone they are until you put the new ones on there and you think, oh wow, that's what it's supposed to feel like. Of course, if you want to improve your stopping power, you can go for some kind of aftermarket brake pads, which I do. I don't remember exactly. I think it's EBCs, or it might be Gold Friends that I've got on here at the moment. Prior to going away in my sort of big trip there, I had to replace the regulator rectifier. It had burnt out. That was the last sort of major job. The rest has just been basic maintenance. Chains, sprockets, cush rubbers, valve clearances, filters. But at a duration or intervals that are not particularly less or more than any other motorcycle. I've been greasing up the head bearings every 10,000 miles or so. Just dropping them out the cone and greasing them up. But the last sort of 300-400 miles, it started to get notchy, so they need to be replaced. Sometimes it's like, wrestling with a baby elephant, especially on a right-hand turn. But I'll be replacing the head bearings on that, and I'll do a little video on it. I've done a video showing how to inspect head bearings before, but when I replace this, I'll do the actual, head bearing replacement video. Now, apart from all of that, there's a lot of things you'll see on forums that I've never experienced. Some of these Royal Enfield Himalayan forums on Facebook and whatnot. And that's things like cold starts. I've never had cold start issues with this. I've never had an issue with relays on this. Any of those type of things that seem to be really, really common issues for certain people, maybe even more so in North America. Maybe it's skewed in that direction. I'm not 100% sure, but it's never been, those types of things have never been an issue for me. Okay, so of course we're at 30,000 miles, so the suspension is certainly a little bit softer than when I first purchased the bike, as you would expect. But again, pretty reasonable considering the mileage on it. and the sort of abuse it gets. As you see where I'm bouncing around it out here. But of course, the rear suspension is adjustable, which you want to do if you're carrying a pillion or luggage. And the front forks are standard; they're not adjustable. However, I'm now at the stage, 30,000 miles, that when the new fork oil goes in, I'm also going to put stiffer springs in there. You can get them from the likes of Hitchcock's. They're maybe only 30, 40 quid. They're not expensive, but they are maybe 10 or 15% stiffer than the OEM springs. So, and I also want to put a stiffer spring on the rear. As I say, at 30,000 miles, I think that's more than reasonable. Considering that this bike, carries a lot of weight quite a lot of the time when I'm out camping and travelling around. These bikes are pretty bomb-proof. You can kick them around, throw them out. Look at the state of it, for example. I mean, look at the state of this bike. But is it 100% reliable? No, of course it's not. I mean, there's been too many parts replaced on this for me to say, oh, it's the best bike that's ever been built. But that's not the point. If you've got some ability, let's say, to wrench on a bike, then it doesn't really get much better than this. It's really easy to maintain. Now, ease of maintenance doesn't translate to absolute reliability. But what I tend to do is when I replace parts on this, they are upgraded. Yeah. When I replace the springs on this, they're going to be upgraded. When I replace the regulator rectifier, the Indian one gets thrown away, a Japanese one went in its place. When I replaced the clutch, I put stiffer springs in there from Hitchcock. What's not to love about this 411cc single cylinder with 26 ponies? It can be a little bit of a double-edged sword, especially on longer journeys. I had that trip where I did 5,000 miles, 15 countries, um, but there were certain days that I would say were 10-hour days that should have been 8. 8-hour days that should have been 7 or 6, especially when the weather was a bit off. And that's where you start to feel that it's lacking on power on those motorway sections. Unfortunately, that can lead to situations that are less than ideal. I found myself on a motorway in northern Italy, and I kind of got myself boxed in a little bit. There's two people in front of me who were, in the midst of road rage, let's call it. The fast lane, everything was flying past, and I had trucks and cars and all sorts slamming their brakes behind me because of these idiots in front of me. With a much faster machine, or even a slightly faster machine, I would have been able to get myself out of trouble much more easily. But that was one of those sort of dawning realizations that, but the upshot of that is that you actually tend to start appreciating the journey more. See, because the world's not flying past. You're taking your time, you're taking in more of that scenery. In terms of basic ergonomics, certainly I can flat foot it, but not only can I flat foot it, I do it with my knees bent. Really easy to stop it from going down. If it does go down, picking it up, as I say, it's not the lightest bike in the world, but if you've got a proper technique, you'll get it up there. The weight tends to be towards the ground on this bike. It's one of the reasons it's so easy to handle in the bends and stuff, because the weight is down towards your feet. It's really low on the bike here. It's got a low centre of gravity. It's got half decent suspension. It's got good ground clearance, so it's good enough off-road. It's not a dirt bike by any means, but that low down weight also means that, see, when you're on those twisty backloads, folks, it means that you can really throw the bike around, and that's where it comes into its own. And those sort of circumstances, it's much better than it should be. Okay, and it's difficult to describe it. You need to ride it to understand exactly what I mean. And I put it down to that sort of Harris Performance chassis, half decent suspension. It's just set up right. It just works, and it works even when it's loaded up with lots of gear. So there she is, folks, still going strong at 30,000 miles, and I think she's got another 30,000, and then another 30,000, and then another 30,000. If it's maintained properly. And of course, I've got the Tenere now, which fills a lot of the gaps that this is missing. In terms of power and performance, that bike's in a whole different league. However, if I was going to Magadan tomorrow and I thought I might need to rely on a mechanic on a back street in Kazakhstan to repair my bike, I don't think I would be taking the Tenere. I might, but I'd be more inclined to take this, I think. And I think she would get me there and bring me back with absolutely no problems. In my next set of videos, I'm going to be working on the Tenere. I've got you know, a new bash plate to go on there. I've got crash guards for it. But I'm also going to be working on the Himalayan. I'm going to be changing the head bearings on here. New brake pads. I've also got my European trip. I'll be releasing those videos at least one a week. So there's plenty to come on the channel. Anyway, that's it for this one. I hope you liked it. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Subscribe down below. Maybe even hit the notification bell so you know the next time I upload a video to YouTube. I'll see you in the next one.